Tonight, you are walking into a Rome that barely knows it is Rome. There is no marble here, no triumphal arch, no grand forum shining under torchlight, no emperor, no legionary standards, no crowd of thousands pressing through paved streets. All of that belongs to a future still far beyond the imagination of the people sleeping on these hills. What waits for you instead is smaller, darker, rougher, and far more uncertain. You arrive in central Italy in the years between 753 and 743 before the Common Era, in the first fragile decade after Rome's traditional founding. Around you lies not a city in the full sense, but a gathering of settlements, a cluster of huts and footpaths, sacred spaces and watchful households, all learning slowly and violently how to become one place. You will walk this first Rome at night. You will begin near the dark course of the Tiber River, where water, a trade, mud, and danger meet. From there, you will climb toward the Palatine Hill, where later generations will say Romulus marked the beginning of the city. You will pass near the first sacred boundary, where a line in the earth can carry the weight of law, religion, and death. You will move among smoke-darkened huts and sleeping animals. You will descend into the low ground that will one day become the Roman Forum, though now it is only damp earth between hills. You will make your way toward gathering places, lookout slopes, and the edges of neighboring country, where the future enemies and future kin of Rome wait in the darkness beyond. As you walk, keep in mind that this place is unfinished. Nothing here is settled for long, not power, not family, not memory, not even the meaning of Rome itself. And that is why this early city matters, because in the darkness of these hills, in the smoke of these hearths, and in the uneasy silence between one settlement and another, the habits of Rome are already beginning to form. You are not entering greatness. You are entering the beginning of it. Now you stand beside the Tiber. The river is dark enough that it seems to carry the night within it. What little light remains above the water does not settle there for long. It breaks, shivers, and disappears into the slow current. Reeds whisper near the bank. Mud gives softly under your feet. Somewhere close by, though not close enough to see, an insect skims the surface and vanishes again. This is one of the reasons Rome exists at all. Long before there was an empire here, before there is even a true city here, there is this river. It bends through the land like a rough promise. It offers water, fish, transport, a crossing place, and a way for people to move between inland country and the distant sea. It is useful. It is changeable. It is dangerous. And because it is all three, people gather near it. You listen, and the riverbank begins to reveal the kind of place it is. Not peaceful, not exactly. Useful places are rarely peaceful for long. Men come this way with animals, carts, bundles, and gossip. Traders pass through. Herders drive their flocks across difficult ground. Wanderers arrive with tired feet and a story ready on their lips. Some are honest men. Some are desperate men. Some are both. In a place like this, the difference can be hard to see in the dusk. You can understand standing here why a settlement would rise above this crossing. Not because the land below is comfortable. It is not. The bank is damp, uncertain, and open. It leaves you exposed. But above it are hills, defensible hills, places where watchful people can look down on the road, the water, and anyone approaching them through the fading light. You breathe in the smell of wet earth and riverweed. There is smoke in the air, too. That smoke comes from higher ground, from cooking fires in hearths burning on the slopes above you. It tells you that people are settled there, though settled may be a too strong word. They endure there. They gather there. They guard what is theirs there. But even from this distance, the settlement does not feel like something finished. It feels temporary in the way many ancient things are temporary, built to last only until the next raid, the next quarrel, the next season of want. And still, it is here, a village above a ford, a cluster of lives above dark water, a place small enough to be overlooked by the wider world, and yet well placed enough to survive. For now that is enough. You remain by the bank a moment longer and listen to the current moving past you into darkness. Behind you, somewhere above the slope, dogs bark once and fall silent. The sound carries faintly over the water, and then the night closes around it again. Ahead of you, the hill waits. And on that hill, in smoke and shadow, the first Rome is beginning to take shape. You leave the riverbank and turn toward higher ground. The path is narrow, worn by men of feet, but never tamed. It rises through brush and loose earth, through patches of stone roots that catch at your step in the dark. There is no street here, in the later Roman sense, no paving, no ordered edge to guide you upward. Only a way used often enough that it has become visible, and climbed often enough that it has become necessary. As you rise, the smell of the river begins to fade. In its place comes smoke. Not the sharp smoke of a great fire, but the softer, thicker smell of many hearths burning across a settlement that is settling for the night. You can smell grain being cooked, wood smoldering low, animal dung drying near walls, damp wool, leather, and the closeness of human life gathered tightly on a hilltop. The air is warmer here, though not more welcoming. Above you, through darkness and the unsteady glow of scattered firelight, the shapes of huts begin to appear. This is the Palatine Hill. Later, Romans will speak of this place with certainty. They will say this is where Romulus founded the city in the year 753, before the Common Era. They will say this is where the first Rome was marked out, where the first sacred boundary was drawn, where a village on a hill became the beginning of a world empire. They will speak as though the meaning of this place had always been clear, but as you climb it now, nothing feels inevitable. The hill does not look chosen by destiny. It looks chosen by necessity. It is high enough to defend, close enough to the river to profit from it, open enough to gather people, narrow enough to make them live close together. That is what you feel first as you climb. Not grandeur, but usefulness. Not fate, but survival. And yet the great story of Rome hangs over this slope even now. Romulus, Remus, their names survive because later generations need them to survive. Two brothers bound to one founding, two men reading signs from the sky, or claiming to. Two rivals arguing not simply over land, but over who has the right to interpret the gods, to mark the boundary, to decide what Rome will be. And in the story, as in so much of Roman memory, the argument does not end in compromise. It ends in death. Remus, in one version, mocks the wall or leaps the sacred line. Romulus kills him or orders him killed. And the city begins not with agreement, but with blood spilled over authority. The wind shifts softly around you as you climb the last stretch. It's an old story, perhaps older in feeling than in fact. Perhaps it remembers a real conflict. Perhaps it compresses years of struggle into one unforgettable act, but whether every detail is true matters less than what the story reveals. Rome chooses to remember itself this way. It remembers that its beginning was contested. It remembers that a boundary mattered enough to kill for. It remembers that rule from the start was something claimed and defended. Now, the huts stand nearer. You can see the rough lines of thatched roofs, the low walls, the dull glow of light escaping through openings in wood and clay. A dog lifts its head somewhere ahead, listening. A child coughs behind one wall. A voice murmurs and fades. This is not a city sleeping securely. It is a settlement resting lightly, never fully given over to peace. And still, it endures on the hill. Now you slow your steps. The climb has brought you into the heart of the settlement. But this part of the hill asks for something quieter than movement. Here, you are near a line that cannot truly be seen in the night. And yet maybe more important than any wall, this is where later memory places the first sacred boundary of Rome. A furrow in the earth, a line marked out not simply to separate one patch of ground from another, but to declare that what lies within has changed, that it has been named, ordered, and placed under the protection of gods and men together. In a later age, Rome will spread far beyond anything imagined here. It will gather roads, provinces, armies, laws, and distant seas into its grasp. But here, in this first beginning, the city is still small enough that a boundary can be traced by hand, by ritual, by intention. And because of that, the boundary matters all the more. You stand in the darkness and imagine it. Note a high barrier, not dressed stone, not gates or towers, only a sacred limit, known because people believe in it, obey it, fear it, and teach it to others. On one side lies the inside, however fragile that inside may be. On the other lies uncertainty, outside, exposure, the land beyond the order men are trying to create. This is one of the deepest truths of early Rome. Its first strength is not wealth, not beauty, not even size. Its first strength is the act of drawing a line and persuading others that the line is real. And this is why the old story of Remus returns here like a whisper that refuses to fade. He crosses the boundary, or leaps it, or mocks it. The tale changes in the telling, but the meaning holds. He treats the line as though it were nothing, and for that he dies. Whether it happened exactly so no longer matters. The story survives because it teaches what Rome wishes to remember. Sacred space is not a game. Founding is not a harmless ceremony. To challenge the line is to challenge the authority that made it and the divine favor that justifies it. You can feel, even now, how easily religion and power become one thing in a place like this. There is no private faith here, tucked quietly away from public life. The gods watch boundaries, households, bargains, seasons, and signs. Men do not merely govern under their gaze. They claim to govern with their approval. A ritual is never just a ritual. It is law, memory, performance, and warning together. If someone says a boundary has been offended, they are not merely discussing custom. They are declaring danger. And in a settlement this small, where everyone depends on the steadiness of signs and seasons, danger of that sort reaches every hut. So you stand still a little longer. Around you, the hill is quiet, but not empty. A fire crackles somewhere behind a wall. A sleeping animal shifts in the straw. Wind moves softly across the ground. Nothing announces the sacred line, and yet everything here seems shaped by it. In this first Rome, a line in the earth can mean more than stone. Because stone is only stone, but a boundary believed in by a people can outlast kings. Now you walk more slowly among the huts themselves. Up close, the settlement feels smaller than the stories that will one day be told about it, and more human too. The roofs are thatched and uneven. The walls are low, made from wood, clay, and whatever the people here can shape, gather, or mend. Nothing is ornamental, nothing is excessive. Each structure exists because someone needs shelter, warmth, storage, and a place to keep a fragile hold on life. The paths between the huts are not streets. They twist where feet have worn them into the ground. In some places, they narrow so much that two people would have to turn slightly to pass one another without brushing shoulders. In others, they open onto little spaces where tools lean against a wall, baskets are stacked, or ashes lie cooling from the evening fire. You can smell supper still hanging in the air, cooked grain, smoke, sheep, leather, wet straw. The scent of animals kept close because they are wealth, food, labor, and security all at once. Somewhere just beyond the darkness to your left, a goat shifts and tugs against its tether. A dog gives a low warning sound, then decides you are not worth the trouble and settles again. This is the first Rome in one of its truest forms, not a monument, a collection of households that matters more than it first appears to matter. For now, the strength of this place lies less in public buildings than in families, kin groups, obligations, and small circles of loyalty. Each hut is not just a shelter, it's a unit of survival, a place where food is guarded, children are watched, elders are remembered, and quarrels are carried from one day into the next. You pass one doorway where the last glow of a fire still flickers inside. You do not look in, but you can imagine the scene without seeing it clearly. A few people close together, bowls set aside, a tool being repaired before sleep, quiet words, perhaps an argument held low so as not to wake a child, perhaps silence, because silence, too, is a form of peace. And yet, none of this feels entirely secure. That is the thing you notice most as you move through the sleeping settlement. The life here is ordinary, but it is never relaxed. The huts are close enough for neighbors to hear one another. That can be a comfort. It can also be a risk. People know who has more grain than usual. People know who has taken in a stranger. People know where a family's loyalties lie. In a place this small, privacy is thin, and memory is long. You begin to understand that Rome is not yet a city in the later sense at all. It is a village becoming a city, or perhaps more truthfully, several villages learning how not to pull apart. That process is still incomplete. The people here share ground, danger, and ritual, but shared ground does not erase rivalry. Shared danger does not create harmony. Even now, under the softness of night, this hill holds tensions that daylight will expose again. Questions of status, kinship, leadership, marriage, land, and divine favor. Who belongs most fully here? Who arrived first, or who must obey? Who may command? These questions are as much a part of early Rome as the huts themselves. You walk on, and the settlement breathes around you in sleep. A baby cries once and is soothed. A shutter knocks lightly in the night breeze. Somewhere farther uphill, voices murmur for a moment and then fade, as though men who should already be asleep have found one lost matter too important to leave until the morning. This is how Rome rests in its first decade, lightly, never all at once, never without one ear turned toward danger. Now you move toward one of the strangest and most revealing places in the first Rome. Later, Roman memory will call it an asylum, not a place of healing, not a place of peace, a place of refuge, a place where men from elsewhere, men with broken ties behind them, were invited in and given space beneath the rising fortunes of a new settlement. If the story is true in full or true only in spirit, it still tells you something essential about Rome from the beginning. This is a place that grows by opening its arms to the unwanted. You walk into a quieter stretch of ground, and the air feels different here. Not calmer exactly, more unsettled, as though this part of the settlement does not rest on old roots or inherited belonging, but on arrival, on movement, on the uncertain agreement that strangers can become useful if they are given a reason to stay. Imagine the men who gather here. Some have come from nearby hills after quarrels with kin. Some have fled debts they could not pay. Some have fled vengeance, or the memory of vengeance they themselves carried out. Some were younger sons with little hope of land. Some were wanderers with no fixed place at all. Some may have been guilty. Some may only have been unlucky. In a place like this, those conditions often resemble one another in the dark. You do not need to see them clearly to feel their presence in the Roman story. These are men who arrive with scars, grudges, skills, hunger, and a need. Men who know how quickly fortune can fail. Men who are likely to be suspicious, watchful, hard to trust, and harder still to rule. And yet, a settlement trying to become stronger has use for such men. A hilltop village with enemies nearby does not always ask where a newcomer has been. Sometimes it asks only whether he can fight, build, obey, and endure. This may be the most important lesson of early Rome. Other peoples may value purity of descent. They may measure belonging by blood remembered across generations. Rome, even in its first legends, imagines itself differently. It imagines itself as a place that takes in men who have been cut loose from other worlds and makes something new out of them. That habit will one day become one of the engines of empire. But here, in this early hour, it does not feel grand. It feels tense. A settlement made partly from fugitives and exiles is not a peaceful thing. It has energy but also volatility. Men who have lost one home do not always become gentle in the making of another. They may become ambitious instead. Fiercely loyal once accepted, perhaps, but only after acceptance. Before that comes testing, suspicion, and the long human habit of measuring who is strongest in a new place. You pause and listen, a murmur of low voices, a cough, the rustle of someone shifting on rough bedding, a laugh that ends quickly as though laughter itself should not carry too far into the night. These are not old families rooted deeply in the hill. These are people learning how near they may stand to one another, and how much of themselves they must conceal until morning. And still this place is not weakness. It is Rome's early talent in its rawest form, to gather the unwanted, to bind the rootless, to turn men from many stories into the beginning of one people. That transformation is not kind. It is not clean. It is not safe, but it is powerful. You stand a moment longer in the dark and understand that the Rome to come is already present here, not in marble or law, but in this willingness to absorb strangers and call them its own. Then slowly you turn away. Below the hill lies lower ground, darker ground, the wet and uneven stretch that one day will be the center of the Roman world. For now it is only a hollow between heights, and you are about to descend into it. Now you descend from the hill. The air changes first. Up on the Palatine, the smoke of hearths and the closeness of clustered huts wrapped around you like a rough kind of shelter. But as you move downward, away from the households in their guarded warmth, the night opens again. The ground softens. The smells shift. Smoke fades, and in its place come damp earth, still water, crushed reeds, and the faint sourness of mud that has held a day's moisture and does not easily give it back. This low ground lies between the hills. One day, this place will be spoken of as the Forum, the heart of Rome, the center of speech, law, bargaining, ceremony, memory, and power. One day it will be shaped, drained, paved, bordered, and crowded. Men will gather here to decide the fate of others. Orators will rise. Priests will move in procession. Magistrates will sit in judgment. Emperors will claim its history as their own. But tonight, none of that exists. Tonight, this is only a dark hollow between heights. You feel the change under your feet as you make your way into it. The ground is uneven. In places, it yields more than you expect. Water has collected in shallow stretches. Reeds whisper softly where the land is wetter. Here and there, the earth is firmer, marked by passing feet in use, but not yet transformed into anything like a civic center. It is a place crossed more than occupied, a place between. That is what you notice most. This low ground does not yet belong to greatness. It belongs to transition. Above it stand the hills with their households, fires, sacred places, and lookouts. Around it lie the paths by which people pass from one cluster of life to another. It has importance already, but it's not because it is complete. It matters because it connects, because it waits, because it is the empty middle into which the settlement may one day grow. You pause and listen. The sounds are different here from those on the hill. There is less of human nearness, more of the land itself, a slight movement in water, the distant call of some night creature hidden in brush, the faint stir of wind passing low through grasses. From above, softened by distance, comes the occasional trace of life from the heights. A dog barking once, the murmur of a late voice, the crackle of some fire not yet gone out. But here, below, the darkness feels broader and stranger. It is easy to imagine why such a place would remain in memory, not because it is beautiful, not because it is impressive, but because it is unfinished in such an obvious way. Anyone standing here in this first decade of Rome could feel that this hollow between the hills is either nothing at all or the beginning of something that has not yet found its shape. That uncertainty belongs to the whole city. Rome is still a settlement of separated parts trying to learn unity. Hill speaks to hill. Household watches household. Ritual tries to create order where geography still divides. And here, in this lower ground, you feel the gap between what Rome is and what Rome will later insist it was from the start. There is a kind of honesty in that. The future center of the Roman world is, for now, mud and shadow, a wet, uneven place under the night sky, a space where a listener like you must step carefully. You move onward through it, slowly, aware that the land itself demands caution. Your sandals find firmer porches when they can. A rush of cooler air slides along the hollow and passes on. You do not linger too long. This is not the safest place to remain after dark. Low ground hides things. It gives poor warning. It belongs to no household fully, and so it offers less protection than the hill above. Still, as you leave it behind, you carry its image with you, the center of future power as a dim, marshy silence between dark slopes. And from somewhere ahead, beyond the hollow, there opens another kind of ground, a place of gathering, a place of festival, a place where welcome once offered will not remain welcome for long. You come now to ground that remembers gathering. In the darkness, it does not look remarkable. It is only an open space, a place where people can stand in greater numbers than the narrow paths of the hill allow, a place where voices might carry, where animals might be brought, where games, rituals, meetings, and displays of welcome could unfold beneath the open sky. But this is one of those places where memory lingers more heavily than the earth itself. Later generations will look back here and see one of the most troubling scenes in the whole beginning of Rome. For a while, you stand in stillness and imagine the place not by night, but by day. You imagine movement, guests arriving from nearby communities, men speaking in guarded courtesy, women and young people brought along under the promise of a public celebration. You imagine animals, offerings, games, noise, the temporary feeling of trust that comes when people meet under ritual rather than under arms. And then you imagine how quickly such trust can end. By its own old tradition, Rome in these first years has gathered men more easily than it has gathered families. It has opened itself to strangers, fugitives, wanderers, and hard men from elsewhere. That has made it stronger. But strength of that kind leaves a wound at its center. A settlement of men without wives, without stable households, without children enough to bind the future to the present, is a place still waiting to become durable. Rome, in its own memory, solves that problem with deceit. That is why this place matters so much. The Romans do not tell a story in which their beginning is innocent. They do not hide from themselves, at least in legend, that one of their first great acts was an ambush dressed as hospitality. You can almost hear the moment as the tradition asks you to hear it. The festival is underway. The visitors have relaxed as much as the visitors ever do in another people's ground. They are watching, speaking, measuring what they see. Then, at a signal, the Romans turn. The gathering breaks. The hand seize. Voices rise. Fathers, brothers, and kinsmen try to respond. But confusion moves faster than order. The young women of the visiting communities, especially those later remembered as Sabines, are taken into the settlement. Celebration becomes panic in a single wave of movement. What had been a public invitation becomes a trap. The old phrase later used for this event has often been translated in a way that can mislead modern ears. At its root, it is an abduction, a carrying off. Yet, whatever name is given to it, the violence is real enough. Consent is absent. The future of families is decided by force. Rome's deed becomes another people's grief. You let the silence settle around the open ground. This is the part of Rome's memory that should not be rushed, because what matters here is not only the act itself, but the fact that Rome keeps telling it. The city does not remember its origin as clean or gentle. It remembers hunger, calculation, coercion, and the willingness to do what neighboring communities would never forgive. That is not an accident of storytelling. It is a statement about how Romans came to understand power. Necessity, in their tradition, does not excuse violence, but it does explain how violence enters the foundations of the state. You look across the dark field and think of what follows. No people would endure such an insult quietly. No fathers would forget. No neighboring community would hear of such a betrayal and remain at ease. The abduction solves one problem for Rome, but creates many more at once. It gives the settlement women, but it also gives the settlement enemies. It begins households, but it also begins blood debts. It creates marriages, but under the shadow of outrage and reprisal. And yet the Roman tradition does something stranger still. It does not leave this story as simple seizure followed by endless war. Instead, it turns toward one of the deepest patterns in Roman history. The women carried off into the settlement do not remain only symbols of violation in the legend. In time, they become wives, then mothers, and then, in the most famous image of all, they stand between two sides when vengeance comes, between the men who took them and the men who came to reclaim them. Between Rome and the peoples it has wronged. That turn does not erase what began here. It makes it more complicated. Rome grows in its own imagination, not only by taking, but by binding what it has taken into itself. Violence first, absorption after, injury first, incorporation after. The pattern is already visible in this early darkness. Long before Rome will practice it on a greater scale across Italy and then across the Mediterranean world. You remain at the edge of the open ground and listen to the night. No festival fills it now. No crowd moves there. Only wind crosses the space softly. Perhaps a dog barks from the hill behind you. Perhaps somewhere in the settlement a child sleeps who owes his future to the choices remembered here. The ground itself says nothing. Yet it has become one of the moral centers of the Roman beginning, because here, in Rome's own story, welcome becomes ambush. And from that ambush, the city moves one step closer to becoming permanent. Ahead lies fear, retaliation, and the high ground from which a settlement watches for enemies already set in motion. Now you turn again toward higher ground. The path rises more sharply here than it did before. The earth gives way to rougher footing, to stone, to steep places where the hill seems less like a home than a defense. The air feels leaner on this slope, a little cooler, a little more exposed. Behind you, the low ground fades back into darkness. Ahead of you, the height waits with the old promise every settlement understands. If you can reach it in time, you may see danger before danger sees you. This is the approach to what later generations will call the Capitoline. In the Rome to come, this height will bear temples, treasure, ceremonies, and memories large enough for the whole republic and empire to lay claim to. But now, it is something simpler and more urgent. It is a position, a place from which to watch, a place to hold if enemies come, a place whose loss would frighten everyone below. You climb in silence and feel why such ground matters. From here, men could look outward over the dark approaches to the settlement. They could listen for movement. They could judge where a cry in the night had come from. They could call warning downward to the huts and the lower slopes. A place like this teaches its people a harsh lesson very early. Safety is not a condition. It is a posture. It must be maintained, watched, guarded, and doubted. And where watchfulness lives long enough, stories of betrayal soon follow. This slope carries one of them. Later, Romans will speak of Tarpeia, the figure associated with treachery on this hill. The details shift in the telling as old stories do. A gate opened, an enemy admitted, a promise misunderstood, or greed punished, or deceit answered with a greater deceit. In the end, what matters in the Roman memory is not the precise sequence, but the meaning. Even a high place can be lost from within. Even a defended hill can fall if desire, fear, or calculation breaks faith at the wrong moment. That thought settles heavily here, because this earliest Rome is not strong enough to assume loyalty, not secure enough to sleep deeply, not large enough to survive many errors without consequence. A single open passage, a single false bargain, a single household divided at the wrong hour could bring danger past every advantage of height and ground. You pause and look outward into the night. The darkness beyond the hill is wide. Somewhere out there are neighboring communities, wounded pride, patient memory, and men who do not think of Rome as destiny, but as a nuisance, a rival, or an insult waiting to be answered. You understand now that the people on these heights do not only fear attack, they expect it. They build their nights around that expectation. They tell stories that teach it to the young. They learn to read silence, distance, and shadow as carefully as other peoples read law. A settlement like this cannot afford innocence, so the hill hardens it. The steepness, the lookout, the fear of a gate opened at the wrong time, the knowledge that enemies may already be moving through darkness while the fires below burn low. All of this belongs to Rome before Rome becomes famous. Before it commands others, it must first learn not to be surprised by them. You remain a moment longer on the slope, feeling the wind move across the height. Then you turn your gaze outward, beyond the settlement, toward the country of those who have already begun to shape Rome by resisting it. From this height, you look beyond Rome. The settlement behind you is small enough now that it feels less like a city than a scattering of firelight held together by will. A few dim points glow against the dark. The shapes of huts disappear into the night almost as soon as you try to fix them in your sight. The hills that seemed so immediate when you walked among them now seem fragile, temporary, exposed to the wide country stretching outward in every direction. And that country, it's not empty. It never was. Beyond these slopes lie other communities, other households, other shrines, other memories of who belongs where and who has wronged whom. Paths run through the dark hills and valleys beyond your sight. Men know those paths. Families know those boundaries. The people Rome will later call its neighbors are, for now, simply the people who were already here, already rooted, already living within the same hard landscape that Rome is only beginning to claim. Among them in Roman memory, the Sabinas stand nearest to the heart of this first age. You do not see them now. You see only distance and darkness. But the darkness is enough. It allows the mind to fill the land with movement. Men walking under cover of night, or messengers carrying word from one settlement to another, or fathers speaking bitterly of insult, brothers sharpening anger into purpose, houses where the names of daughters are spoken with grief and disbelief, villages where the story of Roman treachery spreads faster than sleep. Rome has forced itself into their history. That is the truth you feel most clearly from here. A small settlement on a hill has done something so violent, so unforgettable, that it can no longer remain merely one village among many. It has made itself impossible to ignore. It has entered the thinking of neighboring peoples not as a curiosity, but as a threat. And yet, even here, the Roman tradition refuses to end in simple hatred. The war that follows matters not only because it is vengeance, but because of the strange and lasting shape that vengeance takes. In the story, the women carried off from their families do not remain at the edge of events. Time passes. They become part of the households of Rome. They bear children. They stand between two claims upon them, one old and one new. And when battle comes at last between the Romans and the Sabines, they step between the two sides, between fathers and husbands, between brothers and sons, between the past that was taken from them and the future that has been forced upon them. It is one of the most famous images in all Roman legend, and one of the most revealing, because the city does not imagine its survival through victory alone. It imagines survival through merger, through the ending of conflict, not by erasing the enemy, but by absorbing him, binding him, making him part of the city that first injured him. The Sabines, in this old memory, are not simply beaten. They are joined. Rome grows not by remaining separate, but by turning collision into incorporation. You stand very still in the night and let that thought deepen. This is the pattern already taking shape in the first decade of Rome. Not only conquest, not only defense, absorption. A people fought, then folded inward. A wound turned into a bond. A rival transformed into part of the city itself. That transformation is not gentle. It does not undo the violence that came before it, but it reveals something enduring in Rome's character. Even at its smallest, Rome does not merely push outward. It draws inward. It takes what resists it, and where it can, remakes resistance into belonging. From this dark height, you can feel how extraordinary that instinct will become. For now, though, it exists only in seed. A few huts behind you, a few neighboring peoples beyond, a few acts of memory so powerful that they already are shaped the identity of a place not yet fully formed. The wind moves across the hillside once more, and the dark country remains silent. But the silence is alive with unseen people, with paths, with resentments, with futures not yet chosen. Rome stands among them, not above them, not yet. It is still one power among many, still vulnerable, still learning, and perhaps that is why this moment matters so much. Because from here, with the whole surrounding land hidden in darkness, you can sense how impossible Rome's later greatness would seem, and how much of it begins anyway. Now you turn back toward the settlement. The route feels different on the return, not because the hill has changed, and not because the night has grown kinder, but because you now know more about the darkness through which you are walking. The same slopes rise ahead of you. The same paths wind between patches of earth and stone. The same dim lights breathe through cracks in walls and beneath low roofs. Yet the plate no longer feels merely small. It feels concentrated, like something still gathering itself inward, still learning what shape it will hold when morning comes. You climb slowly. The air carries smoke again as you near the huts. It is softer now than before, as though the fires have settled into embers and the labor of the day has finally loosened its grip. A dog lifts its head as you pass and watches without barking. Somewhere behind a wall, an animal shifts against straw. The sound is ordinary, almost comforting, and yet even comfort here seems provisional, lent for a few hours rather than owned. You pass between the huts once more. The paths are narrow, the walls are low, roof lines lean into shadow. In one place, a faint orange glow shows where a fire has not fully gone out. In another, darkness is so complete that the hut seems less built than grown from the hill itself. This is still the same settlement you first entered. A cluster of households, a few guarded lives gathered above a river crossing, a place too small from a distance to deserve the weight history will later place upon it. and yet now you can feel its character more clearly. Just you have seen the boundary that makes order sacred. You have walked among homes that hold life together by habit, labor, and memory. You have stood near the refuge of outsiders where strangers begin to become Romans. You have crossed the dark, low ground that waits to become a center. You have paused on the open ground where welcome turned into betrayal. You have climbed to the height from which fear watches the night. You have looked outward toward the country of neighbors who will become enemies, and enemies who will in time become part of Rome itself, and so the settlement around you no longer feels accidental. It feels like the beginning of a pattern. That is the thing the return gives you, not a new sight, but a new understanding. Rome in this first decade is still rough, still unstable, still vulnerable to quarrel, hunger, retaliation, and internal fracture. Nothing here is secure enough to boast of permanence, but the instincts are already present. The habits are forming. The city is learning, even before it is fully a city, how to gather, divide, absorb, defend, remember, and endure. That is why the firelight matters. That is why the huts matter. That is why the sacred line in the soil matters. Not because these things are grand, but because they are early signs of a political character that will outlive every single person now sleeping on this hill. You walk a little farther, and the sounds of the settlement settle around you once more. A late murmur from inside one hut. A quiet footstep somewhere upslope. The creak of wood as the night air cools it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would announce the future. And still, you cannot help but hear in these ordinary sounds the beginnings of something that will become immense. For now, though, it remains what it is. A handful of hills, a few fires burning low, a people not yet certain of themselves, but already practicing the habits by which they will one day command others. You slow near the edge of the settlement and look back once more. The hill holds its sleepers carefully. The night holds the hill. And beyond both, the river waits in darkness for your return. Now you leave the hill behind. Your steps carry you downward once more, away from the clustered huts, away from the last breathing embers of the settlement, away from the narrow paths where dogs sleep lightly and families rest behind thin walls of wood and clay. The ground softens again beneath your feet as you descend. The air cools. The smoke of hearths begins to thin behind you. Ahead, below, the river waits in darkness as it did before, moving steadily through a land that does not yet know how famous one of its small hill settlements will become. You do not hurry. The night seems deeper now than when you first arrived, though perhaps it is only that you understand it better. What was once merely dark has become full of shape and meaning. The hills are no longer just rises in the land. They are households, lookouts, sacred lines, memories, the calculations, fears, and ambitions. The open spaces are no longer merely empty. They are places where a people gathers, deceives, bargains, watches, and begins to imagine permanence. Even the silence seems changed, because now you know how much of Rome's first story is already folded inside it. You reach the lower ground and feel the dampness return. The smell of the Tiber comes back first, cool and earthy, mixed with reeds and mud and a faint old scent of water moving through darkness. Somewhere along the bank, something small stirs in the grass and then is still. The river itself does not care that Rome has begun above it. It flows as it flowed before Romulus, before Remus. before sacred furrows and hilltop fires, before one settlement among many decided to draw a line in the earth and insist that the line would matter. And yet, the line does matter. That may be the strangest thing of all. What you have walked through tonight is not impressive in the way later Rome will be impressive. It does not overwhelm the eye. It does not speak in stone, in columns, in roads, in monuments, in legions, or in law. It speaks in humbler forms, a hut on a hill, a dog at a doorway, a boundary remembered because crossing it brought death, a refuge for men from elsewhere, a dark hollow between heights, an open space where trust became violence, a slope from which fear keeps watch, a horizon behind which neighbors become enemies, and enemies in time become part of the city itself. This first Rome is small, it is poor, it is dangerous, it is unfinished, but it already possesses the habits that will shape everything to come. It gathers outsiders. It turns need into action. It binds power to religion. It remembers violence instead of pretending it never happened. It survives by learning quickly. And perhaps most important of all, it learns how to absorb, how to take what stands outside it and, through conflict, pressure, and memory, draw it inward into a larger whole. That instinct is still only beginning here. It exists in story more than in law, in custom more than in empire, but even as a seed, it is already powerful. You stop near the bank and look back one last time. The hills rise dark above the river, their shapes faint against the night. Here and there, a last small glow remains where a fire has not entirely gone out. Those few lights are enough. They hold the settlement in place against the darkness. Not triumphantly, not securely, but stubbornly, Rome at this age does not shine. It persists. That persistence is what you carry away with you, not certainty, not greatness, not destiny in its finished form, only the beginning of a people learning to believe that they can endure, that their boundaries can hold, that their stories can justify them, that their losses can be folded into memory, and their enemies into themselves. Before dawn, this place is still fragile. When daylight comes, the people on the hills will wake again to ordinary needs. Fires must be respilt. Animals must be managed. Water must be carried. Quarrels must be resumed or calmed. Watch must be kept. Ritual must be observed. No one here lives inside the grandeur of hindsight. No one here knows that later centuries will speak the name of Rome as though it were inevitable. It is not inevitable now. Now, it is only possible. And that may be the most important thing you can understand as you stand beside the dark Tiber in the final hours of night. Empires do not begin as empires. They begin as uncertain places, held together by need, nerve, memory, and force. They begin as villages that learn to think of themselves as more than villages. They begin as people who are not yet safe, not yet united, not yet admired, but who refuse to disappear. Above you, on the hills, the first Rome waits for morning. The fires burn low. The river moves on. And somewhere in the darkness between those two things, history is beginning.